Hi, and welcome to Do I Need IRB Approval for My Research? A presentation by Solutions IRB. My name is Cassidy Nosecable, and I'm pretty new to the IRB world too, so we're going to be learning this together. Before we dive too deep into whether or not you need IRB approval for your study, let's go over some definitions. Research is defined as a systematic investigation, including research development, testing, and evaluation, designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. This is just the formal definition of research. If you're here, you are probably involved in some kind of research, but this is the definition as far as we as Solutions IRB are concerned. Human subjects are defined as living individuals about whom an investigator conducting research either A, obtains information or specimens through intervention or interaction with the individual and uses, studies, or analyzes the information or biospecimens, or B, obtains, uses, studies, analyzes, or generates identifiable private information or identifiable biospecimens. You might also hear me refer to human subjects as participants, human participants. Anything along those lines are going to fit into this human subjects definition. Still sticking to the basics here, what is an IRB? An IRB is an institutional review board. Basically, it's a group that's been formally designated to review and monitor research involving human subjects. They can approve your study, approve it with conditions, table it for a later time, or even deny studies. And the whole purpose of an IRB is to protect human participants in research. That's why we exist. We're there to make sure that all rules and regulations are being followed so that your participants can stay safe while being part of your research. Now, in addition to this presentation, the U.S. Department of Human Health and Safety has really great decision charts to kind of help guide you through this process. This is a good example of one that they offer just to let you know whether or not you need IRB approval. They can be a little complicated, so this presentation is kind of breaking it down in a little bit more simple terms. However, if you want to go straight to the source, highly recommend checking out the link to these decision charts. One of the easiest ways to tell if your study is going to need IRB approval is whether or not your research involves human subjects. If there's going to be direct interaction between your researchers and human participants, you're probably going to need IRB approval for this study. So keep that in mind. Another factor that might come into play to decide if you need IRB approval for your study is if your funding source requires it. A lot of grants and sponsor-based sources will require that your study is approved by an IRB, so definitely make sure you're checking your funding agreement to determine if that's one of the conditions of that funding. If you're going to be publishing your study, you might need IRB approval. Now, just because you're publishing doesn't automatically mean that you're going to have IRB approval, but what we've found is that a lot of journals require IRB approval before they'll accept your study and publish it. So definitely make sure you're checking into the journals that you're going to want your study published into. And this is really important because a few times at Solutions IRB, we have gotten customers who have already completed a study and then they found out the journal they wanted to publish it in requires IRB approval. They bring their study to us, but unfortunately, we don't approve retrospective studies. We can only approve studies that are going to happen, not studies that have already happened. So definitely make sure you're looking into that, and kind of just a good, easy way to make sure you don't run into that problem is just getting IRB approval anyways. If you get that done ahead of time, you won't really have to worry about whether or not your journal is going to accept your paper because of that stipulation. Research that involves secondary data is one of those kind of slippery questions when it comes to IRB approval. You might need IRB approval and you might not. It just depends on a few different factors of your study. One case where you definitely will need IRB approval is if that secondary data that you're using in your research contains identifiable information. If you remember way back at the beginning of the presentation, in the definition of human subjects, it does talk about identifiable private information. So any studies that involve that, you're probably going to want to get IRB approval for. Now, in that case, there are a few different categories of IRB approval that you could apply for. Secondary data might fit into an exempt or an expedited category. We have a few presentations on those too. If you want to learn more, feel free to check out the link below. If your study is going to be published, again, just like we saw on the previous slide, might be something you want to get IRB approved, especially if it involves secondary data. So again, this one's just kind of going to be a case-by-case basis depending on all the factors of your study. If your study involves a program evaluation, this is another one of those where you may or may not need IRB approval. And again, it's just based on several portions of your research. You should seek IRB approval if it's a requirement of your funding source, like we talked about earlier, or if you have to have IRB approval to prove the existence of an ongoing program. But it might not be necessary if your evaluation is on an internal program for quality control. So, for example, if you are just surveying your own employees at your organization about a new program that you have at work, and none of that information from those surveys is going to be published or really leaving the company, you might not need IRB approval for that. But if you're going to be interviewing your customers and then publishing that information later, then you're going to want to look into IRB approval. So again, it's very case by case on figuring out if you need IRB approval. And we are always here to help. So if you ever have any questions about whether or not you need IRB approval, feel free to set up a conference with us. We'd be happy to help. Thank you so much for watching today. If you have any additional questions for us or anything you want clarified, feel free to email correspondence@solutionsirb.com, or you can visit our website at www.solutionsirb.com.